All right, good evening, everybody. It is 6 o'clock and time to get rolling with our Wednesday evening study. Glad you're here. Several people seeing them, or I'm seeing several people logging in right now, and we're getting everybody in place. Couple of announcements real quick before we move on. I wanted to mention Sunday got started at Duncan with our return to modified in-person worship Sunday morning at 11 o'clock. So we are started back with that. I want to say I really appreciate how everybody who was in attendance went with the program. We have those different sort of rules and protocols that are in place, and everybody just went with that, and it was really good. And I realized things were a lot different Sunday morning. They're going to be different for quite some time to come, but you got a vision of what we can do there. We can still worship together. There are still some things that we can't do yet. We can't do the congregational singing and can't mingle too much, but we are at least in the same building together at the same time, and that is an improvement over what we've had since March. So we do have that. There's discussion still continuing for Sunny Level. We haven't returned to in-person worship there. Different sort of congregational dynamic and different attitudes, different ways of looking at that, and we want to make sure. And of course, for everybody, I want to emphasize this. I've emphasized it before, and I really want to emphasize it again, that if you're not comfortable with worshiping in person at this time, that is totally fine. We are continuing with the online element. As you can see right now, we got the Wednesday night thing completely online, and then Sunday morning is online as well as in person. So just be very, very prayerful, very discerning about your decision to be in the in-person worship or not. That's an important decision, and it's your decision for you, for the people that you are in the same household group with, people you live with. That's something that you've got to reach a point of discernment on, and do not feel pressured in any way to get back in the building, because we've got this nice dual model going on, in person and online, and it's great, and I think that well, definitely that's going to be the way that it is for a while, and I think that's a good way for us to be able to transition while everybody is still kind of in this waiting period, still kind of in this do I, don't I sort of period, and still be able to engage everybody in a way that they would like to be able to engage with worship. Speaking of the do we, don't we, we are still keeping an eye on the numbers of COVID cases, that both in Alabama and in the Tallapoosa County area, keeping a close eye on that, and we will adjust anything that we need to adjust. If we need to suspend again, we'll do that. If we want to continue, or if we want to loosen some of our rules as we go forward, then we'll definitely use those numbers to factor into do we do that and how. But another line of appreciation, all those folks on the Administrative Council who have kind of been the collective brain on this, and have helped with the process of when do we do things and how do we do things, and being able to think through those steps, all those things that if you were here Sunday morning, or if you saw the walkthrough last Wednesday night, the idea of all those things that we have in place. We had to think through every one of those and ask ourselves questions about those. Why do we do this? Why do we do this? How are we going to do it? All those things had to be taken into account. So thank you to all the folks who have contributed to that thought process too. So that's where we are right now. Of course, we have people who are in need of prayer in particular ways. Some of you may have seen on the email last week, Keith Worthy has had some really good results from his treatments, and is doing quite well right now, feeling quite good. A little bit tired right now, but he's feeling quite good. Randy Sewell is still undergoing some treatments. He started some new treatments this week. So he is still in the middle of that, and needs some prayer for that as well. He and his family, and those who are around him, and everybody who's having a hard time, whether it's with a physical sort of injury or illness or treatment, or just the idea of some people just still kind of being stuck at home, and that can be stressful by itself. And we've kind of forgotten that, or maybe it's maybe not forgotten, but maybe a little less emphasized over the last few weeks. But there's still a lot of our folks who are being really diligent and really particular about staying at home, and that can be very lonely, and that can be very challenging and stressful too. We think at the beginning of this, we were thinking, oh, I can stay at home and it's just all chill and wonderful. But even that comes with its own set of problems, and then being able to navigate going to stores and things like that when you're trying to isolate, it's really, really tough for some of our folks. So let's keep everybody in prayer that is doing that as well. So let's just do that. Have a quick word of prayer, and then we'll get on to our continuing study for the evening, okay? All right, let's pray. Gracious God, thank you for a day. Thank you for the day of life and of loved ones and of opportunities, of blessings and of challenges. We thank you now for this moment to pause and be together, gathered here, and focusing on these core principles of who we are and how we live our lives, how we can look at these things a little differently. Open our minds tonight and help us to have whatever it is you want us to hear from this tonight, because it's likely different for every one of us. And so open our ears and our hearts so that we can hear what it is that's coming our way. And do give strength and healing and help to those who need it most right now. Help us to reach out in your name, to continue to be your church, to be the hands and feet that you call us to be, reaching out and going and encouraging and being there for each other as your body of Christ, functioning together as you call us to do. In Christ's name, amen. So we have been looking at we've been doing a discussion based on a book that we've looked at, 10 Commandments from the Backsides by a guy named J. Ellsworth Kalas. Really interesting book, I think, because it's a different perspective sort of thing. It takes these very familiar commandments. I mean, who doesn't know the 10 Commandments, right? We may not be able to recite them or recite them in order or whatever. We may not be able to do that, from memory, but we all know them. When we hear them, we know them, and it's very familiar. It's something that most of us have heard from the time that we can remember, toddler Sunday school class for a lot of us, first time we ran across this. And so with something so familiar, a lot of times we need to make an effort to look at them a little differently. Maybe find a different perspective, different angle to look at them. And that's what Kalas does with this book. And so I kind of take the book as a launch point and then just kind of discuss from there. And hopefully this has been some insight over the last 7 weeks. Tonight is number 8, and it comes from Exodus 20, verse 15. You shall not steal. That's the commandment. And the way that Kalas rephrases that, or invites us to look at it a little differently, you shall not steal, has the slightly different angle of you shall become a larger person. You shall become a larger person. Okay, so not only does it take it from a you shall not to a you shall, kind of gives a little different idea. And hopefully we'll unfold this a little bit and think of it in a broader, bigger way, as his rephrasing would indicate. You shall become a larger person. So how does that work with a command like don't steal? Well, first we kind of go back and look at the idea of why do we not steal, and why are we given the commandment not to steal? And I think it's pretty obvious, if as long as there's more than one person on this earth, stealing is a problem, or even if it's inadvertent. How many times around the house do you hear things like, has anybody seen my pen, or where did you put the scissors, or did somebody took my shampoo, you know, or whatever, you know, we hear these things even in an inadvertent way, and lots of times in a larger society, it's not so inadvertent, and it is a part of humans being together. Um, and we may say at first, you know, especially as sort of evolved, growing Christian people, we'd like to say that material things are not important. Um, and they're not, really, in the scheme of things. I mean, if we were to line up priorities of life, material things come pretty far down on the list, or they should. You know, that's the way we look at them. The material things are down a bit on the list, certainly after relationships and the health and well-being of others around us and all that kind of thing. But material possessions do matter to us. Property, or what we have, possessions, it matters to us because it's a product of what we've done. You know, it's a product of our labor, product of our intelligence. Sometimes it's attached to things like memories of a particular time or place in our life. Sometimes there's a lot of sentiment attached to it. You know, this is special. This is a special thing because it came from a particular person, or it reminds me of a particular thing or person or an event or whatever. So there are a lot of elements often attached to a material thing. And if somebody steals something, you know, if I take something from you, then in a way I'm taking something of you. You know, something that is kind of you. I'm taken away from part of your life and what you want your life to be. You know, if you want that particular thing on your shelf, you know, there to remind you every day of that particular person or that time, or how hard I worked to be able to afford this, or, you know, whatever significance that's attached to it. If I take that, I've taken part of what you want your life to be. You know, just a little piece, but I've taken part of it. And property is important, not necessarily because we are materialistic, because hopefully we're not, but because property is part of us. It's part of us as people, and includes memory and achievement and effort and dreams and all those things. It can be representative of so many things. Little material things can, big material things can. So they're important. Back when the scripture was written, you know, there wasn't probably a whole lot of things to steal. If you look at an archaeological dig or something, you know, villages of a few thousand years ago, you find farm tools, weapons, hand tools, maybe some kitchen utensils, you know, pottery or plates or something like that. There weren't a lot of things to be stolen. Beyond those few things, you know, you might have some livestock, you might have a small barn full of food supplies, or you might even have a little bit of gold or silver, something like that. But there wasn't a whole lot to be stolen back then. But now it's much more complicated now. You know, we have a lot more stuff. I mean, the size of houses, just for instance, a lot of us can remember, and folks older than me can remember much better, to say, you know, 75, 80 years ago, a family of four might live in a house a quarter the size of what a family of four lives in now. You know, and it's largely because we've got so much stuff. We have our double garages that sometimes we never put our cars in, or we have a storage unit that we rent, or, you know, whatever. And a lot of us, we have a lot of stuff. You know, cars and appliances and electronics and the household silver, and of course money, and we even have plastic money now, which wasn't common, you know, 75 years ago. So there's a lot more things that can be stolen now. And the methods of stealing have evolved over these thousands of years since the commandments were written. You know, in ancient Israel, you know, theft would be an outright thing. Right? There was no need to divide the types of theft, you know, petty larceny or grand larceny or fraud or embezzlement or what, you know, all these different categories that we have. They didn't really have the need for that. But it's necessary in a modern society because today, somebody could steal thousands from people just by doing something like manipulating a particular stock. So, stock market fraud or insider trading, that's another type of theft, right? That nobody 1,000 years ago would have ever even imagined would exist. Public officials can take advantage of their office and get sort of kickbacks or benefits or get legislation through that kind of inadvertently benefits them or benefits their friends who benefit them. There's all kinds of ways to do that. So to trace the type of theft is a little bit harder today, but theft is still there. The one that we think of, ironically, the one that we think of the most probably is the lower dollar value. We think of somebody that kicks in a door and steals your television or something, and okay, that's theft and it's a violating sort of thing. But as far as the dollar value goes, we're thinking really, really small dollars in a lot of cases because that first thought bubble that comes to mind when we think about theft is that guy who kicks in your door and steals your TV. But there are things like that, and there are things like the people who take advantage of other people. The ones who go around after a storm and claim they can fix your roof, and they never fix your roof, but they take your money and head off to the Carolinas or whatever. The ones that steal from kind of all of us by cheating on taxes. We don't think about that a lot, but fudging our taxes a little bit, that's stepping on the eighth commandment, really. And so it just takes just a few words for the eighth commandment in the biblical text, but we have to think about it in a much bigger way, a much broader sort of way, and a much more thinking sort of way. It's not just me going into the place where somebody resides and stealing their livestock or taking their hatchet or stealing their plow, or it's not just that. There's so many different ways, and so we definitely need the commandment just as much as those folks did, or more maybe than those folks did. Another complication is that it's so easy in our society now. The small town merchant, a few years ago, they knew that if they cheated people or stole from people, their reputation would take a hit. Today we can be a little more anonymous. Folks can be a little more anonymous, and it's a lot easier to take and not be seen. Big company, it'd be hard to put in an honest day of time for your employer. Especially if everybody around you chooses to kind of trim the edges and be indifferent about that kind of thing. There are places where somebody who really gets after it at work is kind of looked down on, by the other employees because, you're making us look bad and you're making us have to work harder. So why are you doing that? So and that in a way is a form of theft. And then we deal with things like corporations, big, huge corporations that deal in millions, if not billions of dollars a year. And it's sort of a philosophical kind of question, but can you steal from a corporation? Can you cheat? Can you really cheat from a corporation that deals in all those millions or billions of dollars? Corporation's not even a real person, so is that stealing? And people will exercise this as a philosophical sort of thing. And it's easier, again in old days, to see the sin in going into the local merchant store and stealing something there than it is to shave a little bit or to dodge a little bit over a giant corporation's bill. It's a little easier to do it when there's a corporation, big faceless sort of thing involved. But you know, when somebody steals, we all pay for it, even for a big corporation. You know, the store is going to cover the cost. I heard somebody call it the shoplifter tax. One time, a friend of mine that was in retail, I think that's what they called it, was shoplifter tax. They say somewhere around 2 to 5%, maybe a little bit more. The typical business will kind of build that into their pricing to cover the cost of things like shoplifting and employee theft and things like that. You know, if your neighbor collects a phony insurance claim, well, your rates are going to go up because they did that, right? So when somebody steals, everybody's going to pay. Like we talked about a couple of weeks ago with John Dunn, talking about no person is an island. You know, we're all connected, right? And that is really true with this too. That when somebody is stealing, it's going to affect other people. So a lot of folks have talked about how you can deter some of this. A good point, a huge impact is looking for ways to reduce poverty. That cuts off an entire area of theft. If somebody is not in desperate need, they're less likely to steal things, and so that's a impactful and effective sort of thing to do to help maybe in society. But theft is not always somebody who's in need. Sometimes it's just driven by greed or lack of morals or lack of conscience or whatever, you know. People gaming Wall Street, people with lots and lots of money and corporations and whatnot kind of manipulating their taxes in unethical ways. Community leader, you know, kind of, I don't know, maybe avoiding some kind of fine for their business, you know, through their connections. And a lot of these folks, you know, it's they steal because they can, or they steal because they get a thrill from it. It's a satisfaction, maybe, kind of beating the system, beating the game, you know. There are cases that, and I heard one very close to me a few years ago that, you know, upper middle class lady shoplifting, got caught shoplifting. She didn't need to shoplift. She had plenty of room, or plenty of money, and she was stealing things she didn't need, could easily afford. And they said that, well, obviously she has an illness. She has kleptomania or whatever. She's ill, right? And it is. I think maybe that is an accurate assessment to say that the person who sins, or the person who steals, is ill and is indeed ill with a sin that is articulated in this eighth commandment. And so those actions are driven by sin. But we also know that we can sin by omission just as much as we can commission, right? By leaving out. Centuries ago, a church father named Basil said when somebody steals a person's clothes, they call him a thief. And he goes on to say, shouldn't we give the same name to the one who could clothe the naked and does not? So Basil's talking about a theft by inaction, right? What do we owe to life? If we have enough, and enough is a really, really relative sort of term, I know that. But if we have enough as individuals to care for ourselves, what obligation do we have to those who don't have enough? And that's a question that kind of helps us step into that being a larger person that Callis talks about, and thinking about stealing. You know, am I stealing by inaction? And what sort of obligation do I have to those who don't have enough? Do I vote against school taxes unless they're just, just really, really badly done or badly administered. I mean, do I vote against something like, say, a school taxes when school taxes paid for my education years ago? I benefited from that. Should I then help others benefit from that as well? Can I go to a park or a museum or a concert hall or even a church, and not feel debt to the people who have given of themselves and their resources to make that possible? For me to be able to do that, somebody had to give. Is that not my obligation then to help pass that on? Now, a lot of us, as Christians especially, we live our lives among some of the best people in our world, some of the most conscientious people, the givers. We grow up in churches, and churches are completely dependent on voluntary giving. And so we see this example given. Then I think we have to, as he talks about, be a larger person. Think about this, spread it out and think about it in a bigger way. But the counter to that is we see so often people who are not driven by the questions of what is my obligation to not take from others. We see people who are driven by money and status and where they go and what they do and what they have. They spell, life with comfort and access and success, things like that, without any sort of sense of wanting or needing to then share, because not sharing might just be taking. Prophet Malachi wrote about this in Malachi 3. He said, "Will anyone rob God?" And the prophet Haggai before that said, "Is it right for you to live in expensive houses while my temple is a pile of ruins?" That's in Haggai chapter 1. And any time I think Callis mentions this, and I tend to agree with this, that anytime we are in a position of plenty, or especially in a position of wealth, I think it becomes a responsibility to use it responsibly and to use generously, so that we don't rob from the lives that God has given. And yet as we make more, and I found this, myself, as we make more, our expenses seem to always grow. Our tastes always seem to get more expensive, There's a saying that Callis mentions in this book, of the eyes of a man are never full. And I think that's something to chew on. The eyes of a man are never full. Our appetites always grow. But stealing can be a passive as well as an active sort of thing. We can actively steal, or we can passively steal by not stepping up, taking money that belongs to another, or keeping money that could be spared to help somebody else. Both of those, in a way, I think fit into this larger definition of being a bigger person. This commandment against stealing, it preserves and protects kind of our social order, but it also protects people. It protects who we are. Matthew Henry, you may remember his name because he wrote a giant commentary on the entire Bible years and years and years ago that is still in use. I've got a copy on my shelf over here. But he wrote about a time when he was traveling and he was robbed while he was traveling. He was basically mugged and robbed. And later that day, he he wrote down reasons for giving thanks. And in that, he said that it was better to have been the one who was stolen from rather than the one who steals. He said the one who is stolen from, the one who is robbed, he said only loses earthly goods, and the one who steals loses a lot more. Now, when we steal, we pay the price kind of with a little bit of who we are, with our character. We might not be caught. Nobody may ever know what we did, but there's probably a little bit less of ourselves because of it. And another loss, greater loss even, is part of that right relationship with God that we lose, and we throw up a barrier between us and God when we do that. We put God at a distance, and the irony of that is when we put God at a distance, then we're more susceptible to being kind of numb to guilt. Because guilt can serve a purpose, in a healthy way, it can serve a purpose. The only way to fix it, though, the only way to fix guilt is to restore that right connection with God and the right connection with other people. Looking to God for forgiveness, and then doing what we can. If we have, say, if we've taken something, we need to look for forgiveness from God, but we also need to try to make some sort of restitution, try to make it right, with whoever we've taken from. But guilt can serve a purpose that way. But then when we do that, if we do get desensitized, if we push God to the edge and we become desensitized to guilt, then we sort of weaken our conscience. And without our conscience, things get really messed up. Sin once, it might dig at us pretty hard. Sin a dozen times in the same way, and it kind of loses some of its edge. Some of that sensitivity kind of goes away after doing that same thing over and over and over and over again. That voice that tells us to be honest and to not take, and to give rather than withholding. We can argue with that voice. I would say Holy Spirit voice. We can argue with that, and we can do so until we convince ourselves that we have the right to do whatever we want to do. We could desensitize ourselves to that. We could do violence to our relationship with God, to our relationship with other people. If we're feeling like maybe a little bit guilty, we've taken or we've withheld, we can feel uneasy around other people. We could be uneasy about being found out, somebody figuring out what we're up to. So that destroys social bonds. It destroys relationships. Not only about being found out, but also the suspicion that we view other people. And you've probably heard this before, because if I'm a thief, well, I'm thinking, maybe my neighbor is too. It's kind of what is that, the no honor among thieves thing? That if you're a thief, you pretty much automatically assume everybody is. Once a person becomes in the habit of this kind of thing, we can just assume that everybody else is that way, and then that leads us to another justification to say that, I can justify myself because, I may have done this, but this person did even worse than I did. This person's even worse than I am. So at least I'm better than them, or I'm no worse than anybody else, right? So that's another level of sort of justification, So in the end, I don't think, as far as the stealing commandment goes, trying to see this in a bigger way, if we take or if we withhold where we could give, I don't think we're stealing from the store or the government or our neighbor, or as much as we're stealing from ourselves. Or maybe it's a 50-50, I don't know, but I do think that we're stealing from ourselves as well. We steal from our own heart, and we steal from our relationship from God. The Apostle Paul offers a better way. And he wasn't necessarily talking about the 8th commandment, but still kind of applies. It's one of those Greek words that doesn't go directly into English without going into a whole lot of explanation. But there's a New Testament word that Paul uses that's often translated into the word kindness. Christotes. Christotes is the Greek word. And it's a word that means to have the desire for others that you desire for yourself. Okay, what you want for yourself, you want others to have as well. Okay, and that's just the opposite of stealing, isn't it? Wanting the same for others that we want for ourselves, that is the opposite of stealing. It's kind of the opposite of what we're told pretty much daily in sort of our cultural idea of things. Because we're told you're in the competition with the Joneses, right? To get more than what your neighbor can afford, or something that's going to set us apart, or make us stand out, or make us better, or whatever. That's a really exciting thing. To think in terms of what I wish for myself. Well, maybe I can wish that for my neighbor too. So we think about what we would like to have the most, whether that's achievement or material things or fulfillment or happiness or whatever. Whatever it is that we want the most. If we think about that, then imagine everybody around us being blessed in the same sort of way, having that same sort of thing that we want, right? There was a lady in Mississippi years ago. You may have heard this story. I think I was living in Tupelo at the time this story came out, but there's a lady in Mississippi, Osceola McCarty was her name, and she was a washerwoman. She did laundry for folks for years and years and years, and she dropped out of school in the 6th grade and went to work, as people in the old days often had to do. But toward the end of her life, she was able to give $150,000 to the University of Southern Mississippi. She gave it to Southern Mississippi, $150,000 for scholarships. And she gave it to them and said, use this for kids to be able to come to Southern Miss. Right? And that's that spirit of wanting somebody else to have what you would want. She never really got very far in her education herself, but she wanted others to have it. And she was asked once, why didn't you spend that money on yourself? $150,000, a whole lot of money for somebody in her position, right? And the way she answered that was to say that, thanks to the good Lord, she said, I am spending it on myself. That is a really interesting and wonderful way to look at that, isn't it? And maybe that's kind of the point of the 8th commandment. The person who chooses not to steal, to use the most broad, demanding definition of that, not stealing and not withholding when I could give, right? That person might suffer loss temporarily, but they become bigger in a lot of different ways, in spirit and in heart and in character. Because when we give our lives to being that way, to viewing it bigger, to being a bigger person, we do grow larger. And then so we take that basic commandment of you shall not steal, and we truly turn it into you shall become a bigger person. All right, so there is number 8. Next week, of course, we will continue with this. Number 9, bearing false witness. That's what we're going to take a look at next Wednesday night at 6 o'clock. I hope you can pop in for that one too. Glad you were here tonight. For those of you online and coming in person, I'll see you Sunday morning at 11 o'clock. Hope you have a great night and a blessed week. And I'll see you later. Bye.